Welcome to Enabling Case Study today with the Capital District Transit Authority. It's upstate Albany, New York area. Today we're joined by Rich Fantozzi and Mary Palmatier. They're instrumental in the success of IT at the CDTA and are happy to share with us today about their experiences with Microsoft's 365 services, including Teams and Teams Voice. So welcome, Rich and Mary. Rich, do you want to start with a brief overview of what the CDTA does and what your role is there, please?
Sure. CDTA is a transit organization in upstate New York. We provide mobility solutions that connect the region's communities. We provide transit for everybody within the capital region. The capital region in upstate New York includes Albany, Schenectady, Troy, Saratoga. So quite a large area here up in upstate New York. I manage the IT operations department at CDTA, which includes things like networking and the telephone system.
Great, thanks, Rich, for sharing. Mary, welcome. Can you tell us a little bit about your role there at CDTA, please?
I manage the telecommunications softwares and applications for our call center, for the PBXs, and in addition to doing some help desk work.
Terrific. Thank you both. So let's start off with a little bit of history, and we'll start with you, Rich, to kind of give a background of where CDTA was before you started working with Enabling, and what kind of drove you to reach out for help in your transition?
Back in about 2018 or so, we had an aging on-premise Avaya IP Office system that desperately required an upgrade at that time. And the upgrade would have required us to move to IP-based phones and to upgrade our EngHouse call center system. Also, the other issues that we had was we didn't really have any unified communications. It was really just a telephone system. We didn't use it for anything else in terms of messaging or anything like that. And we knew that those features were becoming more prevalent.
Okay. What were some of the key things that you were looking for to modernize?
One of the things that we were looking for was going to some sort of cloud-based unified communication and collaboration platform. So we were trying to do our due diligence, and we were looking at the Ciscos and the Mitels of the world and things like that. They seemed a little bit too complex for what we wanted, especially in terms of the integrations that we're looking for in terms of Outlook and because we are a big Microsoft place. You know, we have Office, we're on Microsoft, we're on Windows. You know, it seemed a little clunky at the time. You know, they had add-ins and they kind of worked, and but they weren't like, it wasn't really fluid. When we saw the first demo, I believe it was actually Skype for Business first, and then of Teams, it just fit more naturally into the environment, and you could tell. And that was a big issue for us, and that's one of the things that Mary and I talked about quite a bit. It was, how are people going to handle this? You know, taking anything off their desk is a very hard thing to do. If we're going to give them phones with touch screens, and now they've got all these options for chatting and communications and all this stuff, it had to be as simple and as seamless as possible at that time. And strangely enough, Skype for Business at the time and Teams was not really on our radar because we didn't really think that it had the functionality that we needed at the time. But that actually changed as we kind of progressed through this process.
Interesting. Okay. Well, you certainly caught the right wave of innovation there with the platform. Mary, how about from your perspective, were there certain problems that you thought that were critical to solve?
Well, with the Avaya that we had some features with it that were helpful, even like voicemail to email type of thing, but we didn't have enough. And people were constantly asking for, how do I know if they're available to call, those kind of things. Adding our call center software from EngHouse had opened that up to some of the call center employees to see how much more helpful that is to have. We also had people asking for video, you know, being able to talk to somebody over the computer and not need the phone. Having an app on the cell phone was a big deal. We tried to get that working with Avaya a few times. We're not very successful. And then when we needed to upgrade Avaya because of the age of the system we had, it basically needed to be rehauled. Everything had to be replaced, and the cost of that just for the Avaya system was a big reason and why we started looking at other systems. We already went to Office 365 because we were already looking to get less hardware in our server room, and so we had moved away from having the Outlook and the Exchange server and moving up to Office 365. So having those licenses already purchased and set in place was part of what leaned us towards choosing Microsoft.
And Mary's right. The whole system had to be rehauled at that point. So we knew at that point that we were going to have to replace, 200 phones on people's desks, that we were going to have to implement new hardware. We were going to have to, train people on the new system because there was quite a few new features, even if we stuck with Avaya at that time. So we knew that the project was going to be big either way. And at the time, and Mary's exactly correct, we had an Office 365 infrastructure. Email had gone very well with us. Active Directory integration had gone very well. And that was proving its worth just in terms of the features that you're getting all the time from Microsoft and things like that. So we figured with Teams, we would get something very similar. So the cost of moving from a E3 license, which is what we had, to an E5 license, was an incremental cost. And now all of a sudden, not only do we get a phone system, but now we also get unified communication.
Okay. Mary, anything to add to that commentary?
We really fell into it in the right time. Having Teams and the call center software, cloud-based, that we had at the time already in place last March, when people were forced to work from home, even if they didn't want to. It was very helpful during the pandemic. If we didn't have Teams already, if we had replaced it with another Avaya type or on-site type PBX, it would have been a much larger problem.
Do you folks have any other commentary on why you chose Teams?
It was definitely simplifying the IT infrastructure as a whole, no doubt. But we still had to kind of explain how everything was kind of going to work together for everyone to be comfortable.
What did you folks do to prep your user community for this change?
So I'll start with that. We used enabling suggestions and coming up with communication emails. We sent out emails ahead of time, letting them know in the next few weeks, even few months ahead of time, I believe we started. We had documents printed or signage hung in the offices and the hallways for them to see. We had test phones out for people to play with. And then we did the trainings that were in small groups and made sure that they understood how to do it. They had some hands-on parts of it. They had just videos, and then they were able to watch the videos on their own time later on. So those kind of trainings ahead of time helped people see how they could use it other than just pick up their phone and answer.
One of the things that really put enabling above where some of the other statements of work that we got for the implementation of Teams was the kind of the training piece of it and the rollout and that communication piece.
So a lot of that stuff was customized for CDTA and the issues that we knew our end users would have. Even documentation was customized for CDTA. And that all of those ideas and the planning was communication back and forth between us and enabling to help us come up with those decisions because we weren't sure how we were going to do it in the first place.
Yeah, and we had, another good thing that we did was we had a lot of one-on-one communication with the managers. So it was being pushed from the top down. There was no one who did not know that it was coming. Let's put it that way, which is one of the biggest things when you have an organization that's kind of spread out like this. It's like you have to make sure that everyone understands what's coming down the pipe and how it's going to affect them. And we included even people who may have only managed like 1 or 2 people or something like that. We really wanted to make sure that everyone was included and that they felt that they could give us feedback to the point where, in Teams, we actually set up a separate team for them to give feedback to and that they could email, and they were free to email us at any point or even email the group so that people could kind of spread knowledge like, hey, I found this cool thing, you guys can use this. Or, I tried this Teams meeting and this didn't work. How do I do this? So we tried to make sure that back and forth was continuous, and we did. I mean, I'm sure Mary can tell you, we got lots of questions the first few months that people were using the system.
A lot of the issues or questions that they had where, they'd point out, we're not, this doesn't seem to work right on the phone or in a Teams meeting. they've kind of been addressed with the upgrades. There's been quite a bit of firmware upgrades on the phone and software upgrades in Teams, and they're constantly fixing the customer feedback issues.
It sounds like you invested a lot of time and effort into the pilots and the communications and the adoption and training. What has the user reaction been in general, Rich?
I think initially it was tempered. We definitely had some super users who really grabbed onto it and really started using it to its fullest extent, especially the Teams portion of it, right? We let anyone create Teams initially. The big turning point, and so when we were looking at the statistics, we were getting good usage of it. You know, the phone portion of it, of course, was being used. Chatting was kind of being used. Teams meetings, people were starting to get the understanding of that. But once March came around and remote work was kind of forced upon everybody, it was excellent that we had Teams, because getting people out of the office was actually relatively easy. And then once that happened, the increase in usage of Teams was just astronomical at that point. You can see so far it's been increased. And we see that not only with the usage within Teams, but even in other statistics, like the number of internal emails that have been sent since last March has gone down by 40% here at CDTA, which is just a huge number of emails that no longer get sent, right? And you can kind of see that has kind of transitioned.
We were ready for them to go slowly to actually use Teams for all the features that it has, but they were fast forwarded into it and the usage went up like crazy. And I had very little of those people reach out with technical issues or questions. Very little, actually.
That's excellent. Well, you definitely look like fortune tellers when it came to deploying this technology and when, by making people so nimble back a year ago. So kudos to you for that vision. Have you gotten any specific feedback from managers or business leaders in your rollout so far?
Yeah, we've gotten some specific, like I'll give you an example, like the finance department is a very jovial group. They like to hang out together and they like to kind of do things. So they were looking for ways that they were having kind of weekly Teams meetings, but they're looking for like more ways to interact beyond just meetings and things like that. So we've loaded up third-party trivia apps and things like that into the Teams environment that they can use, and surveys and things of that nature. So you can, like, to me at least, once people start getting past like kind of the base functionality of things, and even once they start moving kind of the advanced functionality in a system and start asking for more stuff to be added that they're actually using on a regular basis, that's a big thing, because there is a lot of people don't realize it, but there's a big ecosystem out there behind Teams that we could use. And we're starting to see that. There's a lot of integrations going on. The marketing department has integrated our communication system with our customer communication system with it, so that they can kind of stay within Teams and still interact with customers and things like that. Or they can, if someone posts something on Twitter about CDTA, they can see it come right into a Teams feed, and they can actually respond to that, because they're in Teams so much that having kind of all that stuff kind of come into one place is becoming much more important. CDTA had our first live event. We usually have to have public meetings when there are changes or when there's major changes. So we actually used the live event for one of those public meetings, and it actually went very well. It was very well received. There was, and it's funny because, you think public events, they're going to be easy, they're going to be well attended or something like that, but usually there's only 15 to 20 people who really get to these things. The live event actually had, I think, like 60 to 70 people on it, which was a big increase from what they usually get at some of these events. So so they only actually see more usage for that, because it's much easier to get everybody in one place, not have to rent out a room, not provide transportation for people who may need it and things like that, and they can just bring it up there on their phone or on their computer at home and kind of and be part of it. I'm sure if we had to, we could have cobbled something together back in the beginning of March or something like that to get a lot of these features, but we would have had a handful of different third-party things that we would have had to try to piece together to try and get, okay, remote meetings or live events, or any of the, or even project planning and calendaring and voicemail, all these things that we kind of,
yeah. And that's all we need is more passwords.
yeah. Everything that we kind of put together in Teams, it just, every time someone comes, hey, can we do this or can we do that? We could, like, breakout rooms is a perfect example, right? Breakout rooms was added, what, 2-3 months ago? And, we started using them, right? Because we've been doing this strategic planning at CDTA, and they needed to have something that had breakout rooms, and, they asked us, and we said, yeah, Teams has breakout rooms, and they just used breakout rooms, and it was great.
Fortuitous planning by you guys. Well done.
All foreseen many years ago.
No, it was actually, seriously, was a snowstorm would have been our biggest reason to get people working remotely.
Rich, can you explain a little bit more about the justification process of receiving the funding for this project, what you had to do that research, and what, if any, ROI you're seeing on the project?
One of the things that kind of pushed us in that direction was, again, the investment that we've already made in Microsoft and Office 365. The incremental costs for that licensing was very small as compared to almost anything else that was out there at the time. In terms of our ROI, we have lots of expenses that have kind of gone down. We had, our basic telephony charges were in the upwards of $55,000 to $60,000 a year. Our SIP provider costs, $20,000 a year, right? So that was cost savings right off the bat. The licensing that we would have spent on a telephony system, basically was even when we did the E3 to E5 license upgrade. And in terms of the amount of time it's taken, I don't want to speak for Mary, but as far as I can see, the number of telephone issues that we have is not nearly as much as we have.
Great. Anything to add there, Mary, on those administrative or soft costs from your perspective that there's been some ROI?
Now it's easier for me as far as moves, adds, and changes. There's no, if somebody's moving to another office space, if they're going to work at home, there's nothing new I have to do.
What have your concerns been coming into the project, and how did you overcome them?
It was a minor concern, but it was still a very big concern for me, was we have lots of peripherals here at CDTA. So we have things like, we have conference rooms that have SIP extensions in there. We have paging systems in our garages. We have faxing, all that stuff needed to be integrated. If there was a small thing that I thought was going to throw this entire project off, it was that. It was not being able to integrate those kind of third-party external systems into Teams or into the telephony system, because not having a paging system in the garage was like a non-starter for a lot of people.
The paging system, however, enabling really helped us with. We were willing to get a quote and switch everything to SIP devices, but we didn't have to. We have only one of our locations did that, and the rest of them stayed the analog devices, and enabling helped us, with the right equipment and the right setup and the configurations, and it's working.
How did enabling tech help you along this process?
From our standpoint, almost everything. It's like all the way from the statement of work that we wrote up initially to, refining that, discussions of the Skype for Business to move to Teams, getting our call center provider EngHouse into the mix and working with them directly as opposed to us having to work with them directly as a kind of a separate third party to integrate everything. The actual implementation, the training, the communication schedule, support afterwards. So far it's been a great partnership. I mean, you guys have really been able to, basically from soup to nuts, get us kind of over that hump. And the one thing we like working with third parties, one of the ways we judge them is how easy it is to work with their technical folks and things like that, and how competent we feel they are, right? And with a lot of the people who you guys have had working on your side, we've never really had to question their competence. And I know Mary can speak more to this, but we can recognize when people know what they're talking about and then can do what they're talking about. And because, there was never any, let's just say, technical issues, right? There was never anything where it was like, oh, this went down because it wasn't configured right, or, any of those little things that can kind of happen on a project of this size. None of that stuff really happened. So it was very smooth in terms of the implementation. So, which was great from my standpoint. So.
Can't afford not to these days. Okay, thanks, Rich. Mary, anything to add there?
You guys really helped in planning, the communications, the training to our end users, then to rolling it out. They were ready for any questions, any issues that we had during rollout. I'm not sure of his position, but the engineer that I worked with, because I worked directly with the guy setting up our SBC and doing the programming and configuration, and he was extremely helpful and extremely knowledgeable, and it made me feel more comfortable when I had to go in and make changes, because he even had a recording through Teams of him showing me how to make certain changes on the SBC and things. So it was they really helped in every spot, just like Rich was just saying.
Terrific input. Thank you very much, Mary, and thank you very much, Rich, for your input today. It's been a pleasure interviewing you. Rich, it's been good to see the Capital District's Transit Authority's battery-powered buses go by in the distance, so thank you for the scenic overview. And we really appreciate your partnership. Thanks so much for your time.
Okay, guys. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.